The room was cold. It was always cold on the orbital station. The Velahari liked it that way. Cool air, white walls, soft blue light that never changed whether it was day or night. It was a place built for thinking, not for feeling. Una stood in the middle of the council chamber with her hands clasped behind her back. She wore her uniform well, tall, silver-skinned, sharp-eyed. She looked exactly like what she was, a senior officer. A woman who had spent her whole life doing what was asked of her. A woman who had never once said no to her people, until today. Counselor Bakey sat at the head of the long table. She was older than most of the other council members, and she wore that age on her face with quiet dignity. She did not look angry. She looked like a woman delivering news she had already made peace with. "You have been selected," Bakey said. "Not recommended, not suggested, selected." Una kept her eyes forward. "I know and I understand the distinction. My answer is still no." A low murmur moved around the table. Two other council members shifted in their seats. One of them, a thin man named O'Neill, looked like he had expected this. The others looked less sure. Becky did not flinch. "You are aware of what the numbers say." "I have read the numbers," Una said, "many times." "Then you know that in 2 generations our birth rate has dropped by 40%. You know that without intervention, when within 300 years we will not have enough of our people left to sustain a civilization?" Becky paused. "You know all of this?" "Yes. And still, no." "Yes. Still no." Becky folded her hands on the table. "3 of your fellow senior officers have already agreed to participate in the continuance program. Women of equal rank, equal standing. They understood what was being asked and why." Una's jaw tightened just slightly. "I respect their choices. I am making mine." "What is your objection?" Becky asked. Not harshly, genuinely. Una was quiet for a moment. Then she said it plainly because she had never been the kind of woman to hide behind polite language. "Human DNA is unstable. Resilient. Yes, I do not deny the science, but resilience is only part of the picture. Humans are driven by emotion. They act without logic. They start wars over feelings. They grieve so deeply they stop functioning. You're into our bloodline. You call it a flaw, into our bloodline." "You call it a flaw," Bakey said quietly. "Some of our scientists call it the very thing that makes the pairing valuable. Scientists can afford to be optimistic. I have to live with the result." Bakey studied her for a long moment. Then she nodded, slowly, without heat. "Very well. That is your first refusal. I will note it." Una blinked. "And we're first?" "I intend to ask you again," Bakey said simply, "but not today. Today I have a different assignment for you." The briefing took less than 20 minutes. Sakara 4 was a border colony. Dusty, low gravity, not particularly beautiful, but sitting on top of one of the largest untapped mineral deposits in the outer systems. 3 factions wanted it. The Dravik had decided to take it by force. The Velhari had a garrison there. And because the human governments had their own interests in the minerals, a team of human military contractors had been embedded with the Velhari forces for the past 8 months. The arrangement was tense. It was always tense when the 2 species had to share a small space in a dangerous situation. Una's assignment was simple on paper: field medical officer, observer. She would oversee health operations for both the Velhari soldiers and the human team. No, it was honest work. It was exactly the kind was honest work. It was exactly the kind of thing she was good at, and exactly the kind of thing that kept her mind off questions she did not want to think about. She spent the night before departure reviewing files. The Velahari unit was familiar. She had worked with 2 of the officers before. The human team was less known to her. 6 contractors, all former military. She read through each file with professional detachment, noting injuries, medical history, potential complications. She stopped at 1. Dohun K. Former Republic Special Forces. 14 confirmed solo engagements. 3 incidents on record marked with a small red flag. The kind the human military used for situations that were, in their own language, considered unsurvivable. He had survived all 3. No explanation given in any of the reports. Just the outcome. Alive. No family listed, no home address. His re-enlistment forms had been filed so many times the column had run out of space, and someone had added a handwritten note at the bottom. She read his age. She read his rank. She looked at the photo, a man with a quiet face and dark eyes that gave nothing away. She closed the file. He was just another human. A stubborn one, apparently, but just a human. The shuttle to Sakara 4 was loud and uncomfortable and smelled faintly of recycled air. Yet Una sat near the back with her bag between her feet and her eyes on the window. Stars slid by in silence. Rena, her younger sister and the only person in the universe who could make Una feel guilty with just an expression, had appeared at the dock at the last minute to see her off. "You're going to a war zone," Rena had said. "I'm going to a contested outpost." She believed neither of those things. She believed neither of those things entirely. Then she had hugged her, quickly, and stepped back. "Just don't be so cold to them," she had said. "The humans. They're not as bad as you think." Una had not answered. Now sitting on the shuttle with the hum of the engine in her bones, she thought about that. Not as bad as you think. Rena had always been more open, more curious. She found humans interesting in the way someone finds a puzzle interesting. She liked to turn them over and look at all the sides. Una did not have that kind of patience. She did not have that kind of curiosity. She looked at the stars outside the window and thought about numbers instead. 40%. 300 years. The cold math of a people slowly disappearing. She thought about duty. She had always been good at duty. But somewhere in the back of her mind, quiet and stubborn as a splinter, was a different question. One she had not answered when Bakey asked it and had not answered since. What if the thing you owed your people was not the same as the thing you owed yourself? She did not know. She pushed the thought down. The shuttle began its descent, and below her, through the haze and the dust, she could see the small cluster of lights that was Sakara 4. She picked up her bag. She was a soldier, etched in everything but title. She had work to do. The landing pad was nothing more than a flat square of pressed earth with 2 broken lights on the corners. The wind was dry and constant, carrying fine red dust that got into everything. The sky above Sakara 4 was a washed-out orange, and the sun, if you could call it that, sat low and pale like it had given up halfway through the day. Una stepped off the shuttle and looked around. The outpost was small, prefabricated walls, are reinforced with Velhari paneling on the outside and human metal sheeting on the inside. Guard towers at each corner, a central building that served as both command and medical. It looked like it had been put together quickly and improved slowly. The kind of place people built when they weren't sure how long they were staying, but started hoping it would be a while. 2 Velhari soldiers met her at the pad and took her bags. A new line of 3 humans were running a new line of motion sensors and arguing, not angrily, just loudly, about the best placement. A Velhari technician was watching them with a specific expression that meant she had already suggested the correct placement twice and was deciding whether a third attempt was worth her time. And in the middle of all of it, crouched beside a map table that had been dragged into the open air, was a man she recognized from a photograph. Dahun was not what she had expected. She had expected, without realizing she expected it, some version of the human men she had encountered in diplomatic settings. They were usually loud in one way or another. Either loud with their voices, boasting, explaining, taking up space, or loud with their eyes, looking at her silver skin and her height with an openness that she found somewhere between flattering and exhausting. They wanted her attention. Most beings, when meeting a Velhari officer, wanted some form of acknowledgement. Dohun glanced up when she crossed the yard, when he looked at her for exactly as long as it took to understand who she was and what her rank meant. Then he nodded once, the kind of nod that said noted, and went back to his map. That was it. Una kept walking. She told herself the absence of reaction meant nothing. She found her quarters, set down her remaining bag, and stood in the small room for a moment, feeling something she could not immediately name. After a second, she recognized it. She was slightly irritated. She met him properly an hour later when the team gathered for a situation briefing. He ran it himself. No ceremony, no introduction. He simply started talking, and everyone in the room immediately paid attention, which told her something about how he operated. He was not tall for a human, medium height, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of stillness in his body that came not from relaxation, but from long practice at conserving energy. His face was not young. There were lines around his eyes that came from years of squinting in harsh light, and a scar along his jaw that had healed clean, but not invisibly. He spoke about the Dravik patrol patterns in the Eastern Corridor. He spoke about the blind spot in the South sensor grid and what he was doing to fix it. He spoke about supply timelines and water rations and the behavior of the local terrain at night when temperatures dropped. And he did not look at her once during the briefing unless he was speaking to the full room. When it was done, he walked up to her and held out a radio. "Channel 3 is our internal line," he said. "If there's contact, you'll hear it there first. Medical is in the central building. You already know that. If you need anything on the supply side, talk to Taiho. He runs our logistics." He paused. "I read your file. You've done field work before." "Yes," she said. "Good. Stay close if there's contact. Don't hesitate." He looked at her steadily. Not with challenge. Just information. "The Dravik don't care what flag you're under." "I know what the Dravik are," she said. "I know you do," he said, and walked away. She stood holding the radio. The briefing room was emptying around her. She looked down at the small device in her hand and thought for the second time that day that she was slightly irritated. The days passed and she watched him. She told herself it was professional observation. She was a field officer and an observer. Watching was literally part of her assignment, and Do-hoon was the most operationally significant person on the base, which meant he was naturally the subject of most of her attention. She told herself this and mostly believed it. He woke before anyone else. She knew because she was a light sleeper, and she heard him moving in the corridor before the first light shift started. He did a physical routine in the yard every morning in the cold and the dark, alone, without music or company. Not to perform, not because anyone was watching, just because it was what he did. He checked on his team members every evening before lights out. Not a formal check, just a word here, a question there. "How's the shoulder?" "Taiho says you skipped lunch." "Hyunsu, those are not sleeping hours. Put the book down." His people responded to him with a comfort that was easy and unforced. They trusted him the way you trust someone who has never let you down. He ate whatever was on the tray without commentary. He fixed things that were broken without being asked. When the Velhari technician finally placed the motion sensors exactly where she had suggested twice before, he told her it was a good call and meant it. He did not tell Yuna she was beautiful. He did not ask her about Velhari culture with the breathless curiosity that humans usually had. He did not stare. When he spoke to her the way he spoke to everyone, directly without performance. It made her feel, and she recognized this was irrational, somehow invisible. Not in an unpleasant way. In the way you feel invisible when someone is treating you exactly the same as they treat everyone else. As if your silver skin and your status and the entire weight of what you were supposed to represent had simply been set aside, and you were just a person standing in the same dust as everyone else. See, she was not sure if she liked it. One evening she found Rena had arrived on a supply shuttle without warning. She was standing in the yard with a pack over one shoulder and an enormous smile on her face, looking around at the outpost with undisguised curiosity. "I volunteered for the supply run," Rena said before Yuna could speak. "Don't look at me like that. You volunteered to come to a contested military outpost." "I volunteered to see you." Rena looked around the yard. "And also I wanted to see what the humans were like out here." Her eyes found Do-hoon, who was carrying a crate of equipment across the yard without asking anyone for help. She watched him for a second. Then she looked at Yuna. "Which one is he?" "I don't know what you mean. The one you've been not mentioning in your messages. The one you haven't complained about, which with you means you're thinking about him." Rena tilted her head. "Is it the one with the crate?" Yuna did not answer. Rena watched Do-hoon set the crate down, check something on the side of it, then pick it back up and continue walking. "He didn't even look over here," she said, sounding delighted. "He didn't look at your hair." "Why would he look at my hair?" "Every man looks at your hair. It's remarkable hair." Rena lowered her voice. "He must be broken." "He's focused," Yuna said. "It is a professional environment." Rena smiled the smile of someone who already knew things she hadn't been told yet. Yuna picked up her bag and walked toward the medical building. She was not thinking about him. She was going to work. That was all. It started with silence. That was the thing about Dravek attacks that the reports never quite captured. Before the noise, before the shooting, before everything went loud and fast and wrong, there was a moment of total silence. Like the world took a breath and held it. Una had read about it. She had not felt it until now. It came at night, during the second watch. She was awake. She had been awake for an hour already, lying in the dark of her small quarters with her eyes open, listening to the wind. When the wind stopped, she sat up. When the radio on her shelf clicked twice, short and sharp, she was already reaching for her boots. She heard Dohun's voice on the channel, calm, flat, with no extra words. East and south, simultaneous, everyone up. The outpost exploded into movement, and she grabbed her medical kit and was out the door in seconds. The base's defensive AI was already running calculations, its voice coming through the wall speakers in measured, even tones. It assessed the incoming Dravek force, measured the firepower, ran probability models, and recommended a full retreat to the inner compound. Orderly, staged, optimal. Una heard it say this as she crossed the yard. She also heard Dohun say quietly, "No." One of the Velhari commanders turned. The system recommends..." "The system doesn't know Dravek Pattern 4. He was looking at the eastern ridge. His voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it now. Not fear, not excitement. Focus. Pure, locked-in focus. "They're pushing us toward the inner compound. It's a funnel. They want us in there. The probability model is working with the data it has. So am I." He looked at the commander directly. "I'm not telling you what to do. I'm telling you what I see." There was a pause, 3 seconds, maybe 4. Then the commander nodded, and that was that. What Dohun did next, Una watched from the eastern wall as she moved between injured soldiers, and she would spend a long time afterward trying to find words for it. He took 4 humans and 2 Velhari volunteers. He told them what he needed. He did not ask them if they were afraid. He did not tell them it would be fine. He told them the plan. Short, clear, practical. And he looked each of them in the eye once, and then he moved. They went out the side gate, into the dark on foot, while the main assault was hitting the walls. Una had not planned to follow them. She had a medical station. She had patience. She had a very clear set of responsibilities that did not include leaving the protected area and moving into active fire zones. She followed them anyway. She could not fully explain it later. And she told herself she went because they might need medical support in the field. She told herself it was a professional judgment call. Both of those things had some truth in them, but the real reason, the one she did not say out loud, was simpler. She needed to see. The ridge was dark and rocky, and the dust was in her mouth from the moment she cleared the gate. Energy bolts were going back and forth in a flat, constant rhythm. The Dravek had a line established, and they were pressing it. The eastern side of the outpost was taking heavy fire, and the defenders on the wall were holding, but only just. She found them moving along the ridge base. Dohun was at the front. He moved fast and low, and she matched his pace, and he noticed her after about 30 seconds. He did not stop. He looked at her once, not with surprise, not with anger, just with a quick assessment, the same way he looked at terrain. Then he kept moving. When he reached back without looking and touched her shoulder once. "Stay close, stay with me." And that was the only acknowledgement. The flanking move worked because he had guessed right. The Dravek's eastern assault line was thinner on the outside than the inside. They had pushed their weight inward toward the compound. What they had not accounted for was a small group coming around from behind on the ridge. The fight on the ridge was close and fast, and she did not have time to think about anything except what was right in front of her. She pulled a wounded Velhari soldier back from the line and sealed a bad cut at his collar with field compound while the shooting was still happening 2 meters away. She kept her hands steady. She did not freeze. She watched Dohun. He took an energy bolt to the shoulder early in the engagement. Not head-on, grazing, in along the left side, but enough to make a normal person stagger. He staggered. He caught himself on one hand, pressed it flat against the rock, and stood back up in the same motion. He was back in the line before anyone could react. 20 minutes later, a Dravek soldier got close. Too close, a blade, the kind they wore on their lower arms. It caught him across the side, below the ribs. She saw it happen. She saw the blood. He did not stop. He turned the Dravek's movement against them. They used the momentum, and the engagement ended in 4 more seconds. Then he was walking again, moving, still working. The Eastern assault collapsed inside an hour. Without their planned funnel, without the angle they needed, the Dravek pulled back. The outpost held. Una did not stop moving for the next 2 hours. There were wounded on both sides, and she worked through all of them, Velari and human, methodically and without rest. She sutured and sealed and gave compounds where she had them and improvised where she didn't. Taiho organized the stretchers. Dohun sent 2 of his people to help her without being asked. At some point the noise stopped, and there was only the wind again. She found him sitting against the outer wall of the east section, pressing a folded piece of cloth to his side. He was not watching the commotion around him. He was looking up, past the wall, at the stars. His face was still and quiet. He did not look like a man who had just fought and won. He did not look like anything she had expected. She sat down beside him. She did it without thinking about it first. The ground was hard and cold, and she sat down anyway. She opened her kit and he moved the cloth so she could see the wound. She cleaned it and applied the closing compound, and he held still without being told to. When she was done, she did not immediately stand up. "Guri, you knew you might not come back from that flanking run," she said. He thought about it honestly, like it was a real question that deserved a real answer. "Yeah. Then why did you go?" He was quiet for a moment, long enough that she thought he might not answer. He looked at the stars the way she had seen him look at his map. With attention, with patience. "Because somebody had to," he said. She sat with that. Not because it was a remarkable thing to say. And people said things like that all the time, and usually they were performing something. Courage or selflessness or a version of themselves they wanted others to see. He was not performing. He said it the way you state a fact. "Water is wet, the ridge is east. Somebody had to go, so I went." She had spent years studying the argument against humans, their chaos, their instability, their overwhelming emotionality. She had built her objection carefully, and she had believed it completely. Sitting in the dust against a cold wall, on a planet nobody particularly wanted except for what was underneath it, she felt the first small crack appear in that argument. She did not say anything else. Neither did he. They sat there for a while in the dark, and above them the stars were very bright and very still. And the wind came back, and somewhere behind them the outpost slowly, quietly began to breathe again. She filed her report on the battle at Sekra for in precise, careful language. She described the tactical situation, the Dravek assault pattern, the decision to flank rather than retreat. She documented outcomes, casualties on both sides, the structural integrity of the outpost, supply status. She wrote it all down cleanly in the standard format without emotion. Then she sat in front of the blank section labeled Additional Observations for a long time. She wrote, "The joint operation performed above expected parameters. Our human contractor unit demonstrated strong tactical judgment and effective cooperation with Velhari forces. Recommend continued joint posting." She read it back. It was accurate. It was professional. It said everything she needed to say and nothing she did not need to say. She submitted it and tried not to think about what she had left out. The recall to the station came 3 days later. Dohan's team was pulled back for medical leave. 2 of his people had injuries that needed more than field treatment, and he had his own damage to deal with, though he was the last one to acknowledge it. Una was recalled to submit her report in person and meet with Becky. She spent the journey back on the shuttle telling herself she was relieved. The field posting had been good work, honest work, but returning to the station meant returning to real responsibilities, proper facilities, her own space, routine. She was not thinking about the fact that returning to the station also meant returning to Becky's attention. The meeting with the counselor was brief and professional. Becky received the report, asked several questions, listened carefully to the answers. She seemed genuinely impressed by the outcome of the Sakara 4 operation, and she said so without exaggeration. Then she folded her hands on the table. "You did well," she said. "I mean that." "Thank you," Una said. "And now," Becky continued in the same even tone. I would like to speak about the program. Yuna's shoulders did not visibly tighten. She had trained herself out of visible reactions a long time ago. But something inside her went very still. Becky slid a thin file across the table. We have narrowed the candidate list. 3 individuals. All human, all volunteers, all vetted extensively. Good health records, strong profiles. She paused. I would like you to review them. Yuna looked at the file. She did not open it. I told you my answer. You told me your answer when the program felt abstract, Becky said gently. You have now spent weeks in the field with human soldiers. You have seen them work. Perhaps your perspective has refined. My perspective has not changed. Becky looked at her for a moment, not with impatience. Ian, with the particular kind of patience that was more difficult to bear than impatience, the kind that came from someone who had decided to wait you out because they believed, with great calm certainty, that you would eventually come to them. Take the file, she said. You don't have to open it today. Yuna took the file. She did not open it. She visited Do-hoon on the 3rd day after her return. She told herself it was professional. While she was telling herself things, that she was not going because she had thought about the conversation against the wall more than she should have. The human medical ward was warmer than the Velhari sections of the station. It always was. Humans ran warm, and they liked their environments to match. When she found him sitting up in a bed near the window with a stack of tactical maps spread across the blanket, like he was planning something instead of recovering from anything. He looked up when she came in. Doctor, he said. Not surprised, not particularly pleased or displeased, just acknowledging. I'm not a doctor, she said. I'm a medical officer. There is a difference. My apologies, he said, and she got the sense he was very slightly amused. Kid's wound. He moved his shirt and she checked wound. He moved his shirt and she checked it. The compound had held. The healing was clean, better than she expected. Human biology was genuinely remarkable in that particular area. They scarred heavily, but they healed fast. When she was done, she did not stand up immediately. How is Hyunsu? She asked. Hyunsu, the youngest of his team, the one who wanted to be a teacher. He had taken a bad fall during the retreat and broken 2 ribs. Better, complaining about the food, which means he's fine. Do-hoon looked at her sideways. He asked about you. Said you set his ribs so well he barely felt it. He was very brave, she said. He did not make a sound. He made sounds, Do-hoon said. You just couldn't hear them. He was very quiet about them. And somehow, without either of them intending it, she smiled. Just slightly. Just for a second. They talked for longer than she had planned. She did not know how it happened. One moment she was doing a professional check-in, and the next they were talking about the mining colony's civilian evacuation, how well it had gone, how many families had gotten out safely before the assault. He knew the numbers. She knew them too. They compared what they knew and it matched. Then somehow they were talking about Yunsu's plans to teach, and whether the border colonies had enough schools, and what it would take to build something stable out there in the outer systems. He did not talk the way she expected. He did not talk a lot. He asked more questions than he answered, and he listened when she spoke. Actually listened, with the same attention he gave to maps and patrol routes. She said something, and he laughed. She stopped and looked at him, and realized that she had made a joke without meaning to. "Did he go?" she said. He did not argue. "He did go," she said. He did not argue. He did not ask her to stay. "Thanks for checking in," he said simply, and went back to his maps. That night she called Rena. Rena appeared on the comm screen with her hair loose and her eyes sharp, which meant she had been awake and waiting for this. "How is the posting?" Rena asked with enormous innocence. "I have been recalled. I'm on the station." "Ah, and how is the station?" Yuna looked at her. "Rena, I'm not saying anything. I'm asking about the station." "I visited him," Yuna said, because there was no point dancing around it with Rena. There never had been. "For a medical follow-up, his wound is healing well." "That's very professional of you." "It was professional. Of course." "Becky gave me the candidate files," Yuna said. She looked at the desk where the file was still sitting, only still closed. 3 names. For the program. Rena was quiet for a moment, then carefully, "Did you open it?" "No." "Why not?" Una did not answer right away. She looked at the file. It was just a file. 3 names, 3 photographs, 3 sets of genetic data. It was exactly what the program asked of her. It was clean, it was practical, it was the sensible thing. Yet she thought about sitting beside a wall in the dark and hearing someone say somebody had to like it was the simplest truth in the world. "I don't know," she said, and she meant it. For the first time in a long time, she genuinely did not know. Rena looked at her quietly. She did not say, "I told you so." She did not make a joke. She just said gently, "Una, what do you want? Not what the council wants. You." Una opened her mouth, closed it. She had been asked that question before. Recently, she realized someone else had asked her something very much like it. "I'll talk to you tomorrow," she said. She closed the comm. She sat in the quiet room for a long time, and the file on the desk sat there unopened, and outside the window the stars went on in every direction, and somewhere on this same station a man with dark eyes was looking at maps and not thinking about her at all. She was almost certain of that. Almost. The message came through the station network on a Tuesday morning, quiet as a knife slipped under a door. Una did not see it first. She was in the medical lab reviewing supply orders when one of the junior officers appeared in the doorway with the particular look of someone carrying news they were not sure how to deliver. She knew that look. She had seen it enough times. "What is it?" she said, without turning around. He told her. A faction within their own people. A small group, but loud. And with access to the station's broadcast channels, had released a statement. They called the continuance program a contamination. They used words like purity and dilution, an erasure of what we are. They had footage pulled from surveillance records of Velhari officers interacting with human contractors on border postings. They had footage of Una, sitting beside a wall in the dark, sitting in a medical ward without her uniform jacket. Talking, and there was one still image, very slightly smiling. The statement said her judgment was compromised. Her attachment to the human unit at Sakara 4 was evidence that the program was already corrupting their officers before it had even officially begun. They called for her removal from any role connected to the continuance program. They called for an investigation. Una read the full statement in her office with the door closed. She read it once, quickly, to understand it. And then she read it again, slowly, so that none of it surprised her when she faced the council. She was not afraid. She was not particularly angry either, though there was a cold thing in her chest that might become anger later when she had time for it. She was deeply, quietly tired of this particular argument. The argument that said what we are was a fragile thing that had to be protected from contact with anything different. She had never believed that. Their people were not fragile, and they had crossed the stars. They had built things that lasted centuries. Whatever they were, it did not break when it touched something new. She composed herself and went to face the council. The sub-panel had 3 members. They were not hostile, but they were formal, and the weight of the station's attention was behind them. Una stood in the chamber and answered every question precisely and without decoration. Yes, she had spent time with the human team. Yes. So she had chosen to follow the flanking unit during the Drabek assault. No, she had not been assigned to do so. Yes, that was her in the images. She explained the medical visit. She explained the tactical decision. She explained each moment they had pulled out of context and placed on a screen. And she did it in a voice that was clean and flat and gave nothing away. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. But the implication was still there. He had answered every question she had answered every question she had been asked. She had given them everything they needed. But she knew, with the particular instinct of someone who had spent years in rooms like this one, that facts alone were not going to be enough today. She was thinking about how to close her case when the door at the back of the chamber opened. She turned. Hadohan stood in the doorway in a human military dress uniform. She had never seen him in one before. It was dark and pressed, and he wore it with the stiff discomfort of a man who puts on formal clothes roughly twice in his life and spends the entire time wishing he hadn't. Behind him, Tai-Ho stood with his arms folded, watching the room like he was guarding the entrance to something important. One of the council members frowned. "This chamber is—" "I put in a request this morning," Do-hoon said. His voice was even. He was not aggressive. He was simply very hard to stop once he had decided to do something. "To give a character testimony for the Velhari medical officer in this proceeding." He looked at the panel. "I was told it would be considered." The three council members looked at each other. There was a pause that lasted long enough to be its own kind of answer. Then the center member nodded. "Proceed." He stood in the middle of the chamber, and he spoke. He did not use a lot of words. He had never used more words than he needed for anything, and this was no different. He told them what happened at Sakara 4. Not the official version. They had that already. He told them what he saw. He told them about the flanking decision and how Yuna had come of her own choice, not because she was ordered to. He told them she had treated 4 human soldiers under fire, and that 2 of them were alive in this station right now because of what she had done that night. He told them that at no point, not once, in any moment, did she act like anything other than exactly what she was: a professional, an officer, and a genuinely good person. He said that last part simply, without making it sound like a compliment. He said it like a fact. To the panel, then at the room. "But whatever, he said. He looked at the panel, then at the room. "But whatever she was doing when she was with us, it wasn't compromise. It was her job. She did it better than most people I've worked with, and I've worked with a lot of people." He stopped. That was all he had. The panel deliberated for 12 minutes. The extremist motion was dismissed. Yuna found him in the corridor outside the chamber. He was taking off his jacket, folding it over his arm with the expression of a man who had tolerated something for exactly as long as he needed to, and was now done with it. She stopped in front of him. "Why did you do that?" she asked. He looked at her. "Because it was right." She studied his face. "You put on a uniform. You clearly hate the uniform." "Deeply," he agreed. "Though you came to a council chamber on your medical leave." "Yes." "Nobody asked you." "No," he said. "They didn't." She looked at him for a long moment. The corridor was quiet, and the station hummed around them, and she thought about everything she had been carrying for the past weeks. The file on her desk, Becky's patient eyes, the 3 names she had never looked at, her people's slow, quiet crisis, her own stubborn refusal, and the question nobody had ever asked her before. She made a decision. Well, not the final decision. Not yet, but a smaller one, to be honest, about one thing, right now. "Can I tell you something?" she said. He waited. She told him about the program. She told him about the numbers, the genetic collapse, what the council was trying to do, and why. She told him about the file on her desk and the 3 names she had not opened. She told him she had always been willing to carry her duty, but that recently she had been having trouble identifying exactly what that duty was. She told him all of it, and she said none of it was a request and none of it was an implication. She just needed to say it to someone who would hear it without trying to fix it. He listened the whole time without speaking. His face was the same as it always was. Still, unhurried, paying attention. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked her one question. "What do you want, Yuna?" He said it simply, plainly, like it was the most natural question in the world. "Not the council, not the program, not your duty or your numbers." He looked at her. "You." She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. It was such a simple question. She had been answering questions her whole life. Complicated questions, tactical questions, scientific questions, political questions. She had never once found herself without an answer. She stood in the corridor of the station with the hum of recycled air around her, and the sound of distant footsteps and the weight of 300 years pressing quietly on her people's future. And she could not answer the simplest question anyone had ever asked her. She looked at him. He did not push. He did not fill the silence with anything. He just waited, the way he always waited, without performance, without impatience, swatcha like he had nowhere else to be, and no outcome he was trying to force. She said very quietly, "I don't know yet." He nodded, like that was a completely acceptable answer. "Okay," he said. And somehow that one word, with no judgment and no agenda behind it, was the most comforting thing she had heard in months. She did not sleep that night, not in the restless, uncomfortable way of someone troubled by bad dreams or physical pain. As she lay in the dark in her quarters with her eyes open and her mind running, and it was the clearest, most awake she had felt in years, like something that had been coiled tight for a long time had finally been allowed to move. She thought about her mother. Her mother had been a council officer too, a brilliant woman, cold on the outside and deeply warm underneath it, the kind of person who did not show you how much she cared until she showed you, and when she showed you, it was unmistakable. She had served the Velhari people for 40 years without complaint. She had given everything that was asked of her. Una had asked her once when she was very young if she had ever wanted something for herself, something that was not about duty or service or the people. Her mother had been quiet for a long time. Then she had said, "I wanted many things. I made my choices. I do not regret them." And then she had said nothing more. Yeah, and Una had been too young to hear the space around those words. The things that were not said. The many things that had stayed many things and never become real. She lay in the dark and heard that space now, and it was louder than she expected. In the morning she opened the file. She sat at her desk with a cup of something warm that she did not taste, and she opened the file Becky had given her, and she looked at the 3 names and the 3 photographs and the 3 sets of data. Or they were good men, all of them. Healthy, stable, intelligent, thoroughly vetted. The genetic compatibility numbers were solid. There was nothing wrong with any of them. She closed the file, not because they were bad, because she felt nothing. Not discomfort, not aversion, not even the cold professional assessment she would have felt about any other clinical decision. Just nothing. A blank space where something should have been. She sat with that blankness for a long time, and she was honest with herself in a way she had not been honest before. The program asked her to make a decision about her body, her life, the future that would exist inside her, for her people. It was the right thing to do. She still believed that. She had not stopped believing it. Her people were struggling. The numbers were real. The solution that had been found was imperfect, but it was real too. To carry it whole. She found him that to carry it whole. She found him that afternoon. He was in one of the station's maintenance corridors, which she had learned was where he went when he wanted to think without being bothered, because almost no one went there voluntarily. He was sitting on a crate, doing nothing. "Me file," she said. He waited. "3 names file," she said. He waited. 3 names. All good candidates. She paused. I felt nothing. Looking at them. Not against them. Just nothing. He was quiet. "I have been thinking," she said, "about what you asked me, what I want." She moved into the corridor and stood in front of him, and she made herself say it clearly. "Will you paperwork? I am not here as a program you paperwork. I am not here as a program representative. I am not here because of duty or numbers, or because anyone sent me." She looked at him. "I am here as myself, as Una. And what Una wants, what I have been slowly understanding I want, is to make this choice, this specific choice, for myself." He was still watching her. His face was calm, but she could see in the very slight way his breathing had changed that he was not unmoved. "I want to ask you," she said, "if you would consider being part of my life, a real part, not a transaction, not a program arrangement, a partnership between 2 people who are honest with each other." She held his gaze. "I know I am asking something large. I know you never volunteered for the program. You are allowed to say no. I will not hold it against you, and I will walk out of this corridor, and we will go back to being colleagues, and I will not mention it again." She took a breath. "But I wanted you to know, because you asked me what I wanted, and I finally know the answer, and the answer is this." The corridor was very quiet. He looked at her for a long time. She watched his face, and she did not fidget, and she did not look away. And because she had said what she said, and it was out in the world now, and there was nothing to do but let it be. He stood up slowly. He was not a man who moved dramatically. He stood up the same way he did everything, directly and without extra motion. "I've re-enlisted 6 times," he said. "Different contracts, different planets, different jobs." He looked at her. People ask me why. I tell them it's the work. That's true. Why, but the whole truth is, I've been looking for a reason to stay in one place. He paused. I haven't found one. Until this posting. He paused again. Until you. She was quiet. Is that a yes? She said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. That's a yes, he said. She nodded once. Then, because she did not know what else to do with what she was feeling, and she had never been particularly demonstrative, she held out her hand. He took it. Not a shake, just a hold. Flat and factual. While Rena sat across flat and factual, while Rena sat across from her with a cup in her hands and an expression of elaborate casualness. Rena listened. She set down her cup. And then she made a sound that was not dignified and pressed both hands over her face, and her shoulders shook. Are you crying? Una said. No, Rena said, muffled behind her hands. You're crying. I am expressing emotion in a controlled and Velhari-appropriate way, Rena said. She lowered her hands. Her eyes were completely wet. I'm so happy for you. I'm going to be such a good aunt. That is extremely premature. I know. Rena wiped her face and smiled, and it was the kind of smile that was impossible to be annoyed by. You picked the right one, you know. Until you. Yes, she said quietly. Until you. Yes, she said quietly. I think I did. She met with Becky the next morning and told her everything. Not the emotional parts. Those were hers to keep. But the facts. Her candidate. The nature of the arrangement. That it would not follow the standard program structure. Becky listened without expression. And when Una finished, the counselor looked at her for a long moment. This is not what the program intended, she said. No, Una agreed. He was not vetted for the program. He never applied. He has an excellent medical record, Una said. I checked it thoroughly. I am, after all, a medical officer. Becky looked at her. And then very slowly the corner of her mouth moved. It was barely visible. In someone less controlled, it would have been a smile. Anna, I will review the program guidelines, Becky said, in a voice that had no expression at all. There may be room for adjustment. I thought there might be, Una said. She walked out of the office and down the long white corridor, and the cold blue light was the same as it had always been, and the air was the same temperature, and everything looked exactly the way it always had. But something inside her was different. She had carried duty her whole life. She was still carrying it. But it felt different now. Lighter. Not because it had gotten smaller, but because, for the first time, she was choosing it. And that, she found, made all the difference. The child was born in the early hours of a station morning, when the blue lights had dimmed to their night setting, and the corridors were quiet, and the rest of the universe seemed very far away. She was small, the way all newborns are small, and she looked like she was deciding something very important with her eyes closed. She had her mother's pale silver tint along her shoulders and the backs of her hands. She had her father's dark hair in the shape of his brow. Her fingers, when she curled them, were impossibly precise. The way a small thing is precise before it knows it has any power at all. The Velhari genetic team came in the morning, and they were quietly reverent. They ran their assessments with the careful hands of people who had been waiting a long time for something. They looked at the results, and they looked at each other, and one of the younger scientists, a woman who had spent 4 years working on the continuance program's genetic models, pressed her lips together and had to look away for a moment before she could speak. The resilience markers were better than anything they had projected. Not just the physical markers, the healing rate, the immune adaptability, the cellular endurance that human genetics carried like a signature. Those were strong. But there were other things the models had not fully predicted because they could not have predicted them, because they required 2 specific people and 1 specific child, and no algorithm in the world could have told you exactly what that would produce. The genetic team wrote their report in careful scientific language. But underneath the language, the thing they were actually saying was, she is going to be remarkable. Do-hoon held his daughter for the first time while Yuna slept. When he sat in the chair beside the bed and held this very small person and looked at her with the same expression he used when he looked at stars. Quiet, present, not performing anything. Tai-Ho had come to the door earlier, looked in, and then very carefully backed away without saying anything, which for Tai-ho was the equivalent of a deeply emotional gesture. Dohun did not know, sitting in that chair, what kind of world his daughter would grow up in. He knew what the station was now. And he knew what the border colonies were now. He had seen enough of the universe to have a realistic view of it. It was not always fair, and it was not always kind, and there would be people who looked at his daughter and saw a problem before they saw a person. He knew all of that. He looked at her anyway, and what he felt was not complicated. It was the same thing he had felt the first time he decided to do something that needed doing without being asked. Simple, clear, unshakable. Weki, he was going to be here, whatever it took, however long it took. She opened her eyes briefly, just for a moment, and looked at him with the unfocused and entirely serious gaze of a newborn who has not yet figured out that looking is a skill. "You're going to be trouble," he said softly. She closed her eyes again. She had decided, apparently, that the world could wait. Yuna named her Haisol. It was a word from an old language, old enough that most Velhari did not recognize it. Well, but Yuna had always liked the sound of it. It meant something close to the way sunlight comes through water, the kind of light that moves and changes and cannot be held still. It suited her. Rena held Haisol for approximately 45 minutes and spent 35 of those minutes talking to her in a soft and earnest voice about the importance of causing appropriate amounts of chaos at the right moments in life. Dohun watched this from across the room, and he appeared to be both concerned and supportive in equal measure. "She can't understand you," Yuna said. "She absolutely can," Rena said with complete confidence. "She's very advanced. She is 3 days old. She has excellent genetics," Rena said, and did not stop talking to the baby. The change did not happen all at once. Change never did, Yuna had learned. It did not arrive like a Dravik assault, loud and sudden and impossible to ignore. It came the way a tide comes, slowly, constantly. And by the time you noticed how far it had moved, you could not point to the exact moment it had started. Beiki reviewed the program guidelines as she had said she would. The adjustments she made were careful and measured, small on paper, significant in practice. The program shifted from an assigned structure to a voluntary one. Candidates were encouraged to build real connection first. Timelines were extended. The matching process was made collaborative rather than directive. The outcomes, when measured 18 months later, were substantially better, not just in terms of genetic compatibility, though those numbers improved too, but in terms of what the children were like, what the families were like, what happened when Velhari and human officers worked alongside each other and ate at the same tables and told each other about the places they came from and the things they cared about. Something happened to the distance between them. But it did not disappear. There were still misunderstandings, still friction, still moments when the two species looked at each other and did not fully recognize what they were seeing. But the distance changed its nature. It went from a gap to a space. And in that space, slowly, carefully, things began to grow. Haisal was 2 years old the first time she grabbed Dohun's face with both hands and examined it with the focused intensity of someone conducting a serious investigation. At the same time, dark and sharp, and the same time, dark and sharp in thinking. "That's from a long time ago," he said. She patted his cheek. It was unclear whether this was comfort or simply her completing her examination. Yuna, watching from across the room, said nothing, but she felt something move in her chest, warm and unannounced, with a kind of feeling that arrived before you had time to prepare for it. She thought about the woman she had been in that cold council chamber 2 years ago, standing with her hands behind her back, saying no in a clear and professional voice, certain that she understood exactly where her lines were and what it would cost to cross them. She had not been wrong exactly. She had been incomplete. She had known the cost of opening. She had not known the weight of what was on the other side. She looked at her daughter sitting in her father's lap, still investigating his face with great seriousness. She looked at the man who had walked into a council chamber in a uniform he hated to say true things about her. She thought about a dusty wall, in a cold night, in the stars above Sakara 4, and somebody had to said like a simple fact. She had carried duty her whole life. She carried it still. But now she also carried this. This warm and specific and entirely unscheduled thing. And it turned out there was room for both. More than room. They fit together the way things fit together when they were always supposed to be together, and you just had not known it yet. The report that came out of the continuance program's second review did not use emotional language. It was a scientific document. It spoke in numbers and data and carefully measured outcomes. But it had a section near the end, authored by the same young genetic scientist who had looked away when she first saw Hasol's markers. And that section said something that was not quite scientific, and everyone who read it knew it. It said, the most successful outcomes appear to arise not from optimal matching of genetic profiles, but from genuine partnership between individuals. When both parties choose freely, the result is not merely compatible. It is, by every measure we have, better. Becky read that section and filed it under the heading, known, but useful to confirm. She allowed herself the small smile again. Hasol grew. She was fast and loud and curious in a way that was tiring and wonderful. She asked questions about everything and accepted incomplete answers with suspicion. She inherited her mother's precision and her father's relentlessness, and combined them in ways that frequently required adult supervision. She was, as predicted, trouble. She was, not as Yuna had answered that long ago morning in a station corridor, extraordinary, same thing. And in the outer systems, on the border colonies and the joint postings and the diplomatic stations, where two species were slowly, imperfectly learning to share space, there were others like her, children who were both things at once, who moved between worlds without belonging only to one, who carried resilience in their cells and precision in their minds and the particular stubborn brightness of people who came from two directions and landed somewhere new. The Valhari had feared disappearing. They had not disappeared. They had become something they had not expected, and it was better than what they had planned for, and stranger and more alive. It had started as most things start, with a woman who refused, and a warrior who was simply, quietly worth it. Hot, and a question that nobody had ever thought to ask before. What do you want? The answer, it turned out, was everything.